is Patrice Wooten. I am the pastor of discipleship at the Landover campus. I've been at Zion since 2008. I was born in Newark, New Jersey, South Side. I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment, my mom, dad, sister, and I. Growing up in Newark, it was a fun time. It was back in the, I'm dating myself, but in the early 70s, mid 80s, a time when neighborhoods were neighborhoods. We grew up on the street, playing in the street, playing from neighbor's house to neighbor's house. We grew up going down the street to get the switch, and all the neighbors seeing you coming back with the switch, knowing what was going on. Grew up in that neighborhood that had the nosy neighbor like room 222 or 227 where somebody sat in the window and told all your business, and they was always telling on me because I stayed in trouble. My mom and dad were factory workers. So I grew up really poor, but not knowing how poor I was because my parents, they made it work. My mom sewed, she made all of our clothes. We were that family. We were that family where my mom would make the suit for my dad, the polyester suits. I'm talking about the rust color polyester suits. Where my dad would have on the 3-piece suit, my mom, my sister and I dressed alike. So it was, it was humble beginnings, but it was fun. It was fun. As a kid growing up, I first became really conscious of God when I stood on the playground and watched a classmate's house burning down from a distance. And that was the first time I prayed, and that was the first time I began to talk to God. And I was about in the 5th grade, and from that time on, I just was always conscious of God's presence, always just a little fearful of doing wrong, even though I was doing wrong. And so I always just sensed God, but never wanted to play with God. And so when I went to college, I was still doing all that I knew to do. I went to college and I was partying hard. But the first thing I did when I got to college, because it was a Caucasian school, it was a culture shock for me. Because like I said, I grew up in South Side, Newark, New Jersey. So it was a culture shock when I got to Drexel University, and I said, I know where I can find my people. I'm going to find the gospel choir. So I joined the gospel choir, and this was my first experience with holiness. These young people did not play with God. I didn't want to go to the devotional time because they would be in there testifying, the Spirit of God would hit the room, and I just felt convicted. So I was in school, I was smoking marijuana, I was doing cocaine, I was doing everything I was big enough to do, but yet aware of God. And I made a wager with God. And I know that he wasn't in on it, but I felt like he was. I said, Lord, if you let me have a good time at the pen relays, when I get back, I'm going to get saved. Well, I'm telling y'all, I felt like, you know how we have the beauty filters now on social media? I felt like that weekend, there was like this supernatural beauty filter on me. Because when I tell you, I was it at the pen relays. Like, they didn't see none of my girls. I was with my girls, and my girls were bad. But I was getting all the attention, all the brothers was hitting on me. I was partying hard. I had the absolute time of my life. And the whole time I kept saying to myself, uh-oh, I guess I'm going to have to keep up my end of the deal. But the truth of the matter is, it was just that God's hand was on me. And being in the choir and seeing the young people there and how sold out they were for God, when I would see them on campus, I would get convicted. I would be smoking a cigarette and see the choir leader and drop my cigarette because of the presence of God on her life. And so I finally, one night in my dorm room, fell on my knees, gave my life to the Lord. And when I tell you I did a 180 the next day, see, I'm gonna really date myself now. I got rid of my 8 tracks, Parliament, Funkadelic. I threw everything away. I gave some of them away. When I tell you I didn't want any part of my old lifestyle, I threw my weed away, y'all. Anyway, I'm not feeling sorry about that now, but I'm just saying this how saved I got. I got rid of my weed. I went up to my drug dealer on campus and told him, I gave my life to Jesus, and he said there must be a God. So that's how hard I was out there. But as hard as I was out there, from there, that's how hard I started going from God, for God. And before I left college, I had already read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation because I wanted to know God for myself. Well, I kind of look at my life as the all things work together for good. That's kind of one of my theme scriptures. I was from 2000 to 2008, I was full-time on staff at another church. And in 2008, when I left that church, and things happen and things do happen, I'm only going to give my testimony. It began to be a dark time. And I at that point, I uncalled myself. I was angry with God. I took everything that I had, all of my books, my messages, my teachings, I took them to the dump. I was like, okay, I'm done. We're done. I'm just going to exist. But I always have an attraction. It was like I couldn't just not go to church, though. I didn't totally want to go to hell or anything. So I wound up at Zion Church, and I just came in and I sat in the back. But that's the thing about God. You can never, if God's hand is on your life, you really can never hide. Every church I've ever been to, that's how I come in. I sit in the back, but God just seems to put that spotlight on. And so I went through a dark season between 2008 until I came on staff at Zion in 2021, 20, I'm not sure, 21. But I was working at a labor union, and I was working at a labor union for sailors on U.S. flag ships. So when they say cuss like a sailor, that's not just a term. I was on a labor union where nobody was thinking about God, nobody talked about God, but they knew my testimony. They knew where I came from. And God's still there. I was still pastoring. I went from being an accountant to being the director of human resources, because at the end of the day, human resources is really looking after people. And so I did that, and just still knew that God's hand was upon me and that he had called me to minister. And so in the midst of that, just being faithful to God and knowing that God called me to pastor, and I really, even to this day, what does that really mean? It just means God has given me a heart for people, a heart to fight for people, a heart to lead and to make sure that people are nurtured and cared for. And God just so fit that he turned that situation around, even though I had uncalled myself and I literally threw Bibles in the dump in Anne Arundel County. I threw everything away, but God didn't throw me away. And so I'm so grateful that even though I just kind of turned my back on him, he still worked everything together, brought me to Zion Church, and God moved me forward and he promoted me. And so I'm grateful for that time. And I know that no matter what goes on in my life, no matter how dark it gets, all things still work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. So for that, I'm grateful.